I have a little activity, which is just these yellow cards that will issue, I'll send them around, but they're labeled, my employee relations issue is, and you can write it on here, and it can be something new, it can be something on your mind that you've dealt with before, and then we'll work through a few of these together, okay? So I am just going to reintroduce myself. I'm Kathleen. I'm the VP for Human Resources for the Research Foundation on the corporate side, but I'm doing my best work when I'm with you. So I feel like being able to get out and come to the 29 to 30 campuses that have research activities, sponsored program work, actually makes me better at what I do. But I have to say, if I was going to identify a couple of HR areas that I tend to have the most contact, it's in employee relations and performance management. And part of it is because some of the smaller campuses don't have employee relations directors, and on the state side, their ER people might not know what's going on the Research Foundation side. So I do a lot of that and a lot of learning and development, so we'll probably emphasize both of those. Okay, so the objectives, I'm just going to talk a little bit about culture and the tone at the top. I'm going to give you some tips on best practices in employee relations. I want to talk a little bit about our policies on solving problems in the workplace, and then I'm going to end with this employee relations review. We spend a lot of time at the Research Foundation in the space of compliance and ethics. So when we're talking about conflicts of interest, employee relations, the important piece of this is trust. And so when that breaks down, things just spiral downward quickly. So as an entity, we just try to emphasize the fact that doing the right thing when it's most difficult for you to do it and no one's watching. My daughter goes to school in Rhode Island. She had we get hysterical calls from her every couple weeks. The senior, and here's the latest. She realized that she gets a 50 on a test, and the other people that get 80s cheated. So she's calling me to say, and I went right to Professor so-and-so and told them that, there was cheating going on. And so my question to her was, if you had gotten an 80, would you have been the one telling on everybody, or was it just because you got the 50? And then I pointed her to the academic standards of the university and said, this is terrible. Cheating in college is not the same thing as looking at someone's paper in high school. Cheating in college, you get expelled, the professor can get in trouble. This is a big deal. And so when I kind of went through it with her, she said, geez, I don't know if I did the right thing. And I couldn't tell her if she did the right thing. From an ethical standpoint, it's hard for us to know what the right thing is to do. But at the RF, we want you to always question it and just try to work with a group of people to help you figure out what the right answer is. And in this case, for my daughter Marissa, I think she did the right thing, but I think she did it for the wrong reason. Why haven't employees speak up? Do you ever hear this? They're afraid of retaliation. And I have been working really long and hard for the last year at SUNY Poly. So if you're familiar with what happened there with Dr. Caballeros, he was indicted, brought up on charges. I was the one that had to go in and let the employees go. So there's a layoff, I'm the one there. And I am talking to people not just at the end of their career at the RF, but beforehand I was there quite a bit. And they all said the same thing. We are afraid of our losing our jobs. And we live and work in the seat of government, and we're afraid that there's too much pressure in other, the governor's office and the second floor, and that we didn't come forward with issues that maybe we should have, but because we were afraid we wouldn't get rehired in Albany, New York. So this happens, and I know it happens, but boy, when you're listening to employees talk about it, you realize it's in their hearts. And so fear of retaliation is such an issue, and how we manage it is tough. Being truthful becomes public, of course, and then transparency is a word that we all use. Like how do you be your best, most transparent self in an ethical way? And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some good employee relations practices that can help us with that. So we have 10 expectations in the code of conduct for the RF, and if you work for the RF, you actually have to certify this annually. So we send something out in January, and we ask people to do an attestation that you've read the code of conduct. I actually carry it with me. Fun life that I have. I carry the code of conduct with me and the employee handbook because I'm always afraid I'm going to get a question I don't know the answer to. But here are a few expectations: act ethically and with integrity, be fair and respectful to others, manage responsibly, protect and preserve the RF resources, promote a culture of compliance, ethically carry out sponsored research administration and research, avoid conflicts of interest, carefully manage public, private, and confidential information, promote health and safety, and follow the law. That sounds like a lot. I'll give you an example. Because I signed the vendor contracts for all the benefits that RF employees have, there's a group of people that look at them, but I sign them. You would not think that we could get in the middle of a conflict as quickly as we can, but listen to what happens. I'm meeting with the people that are looking at our vision care, and it's with Davis Vision, and they're the ones that provide, all the different vendors that they use for our vision care. I'm sitting next to the woman who is like the salesperson. She's lovely. She's going to give us a better deal on something. She notices a scratch on my glass, and I said, yeah, I've got to get that fixed. And she said, well, I'll take care of it. I said, no, you don't have to take care of it. I have an appointment coming up. I'll go. I go to Casey Vision, who takes our Davis Vision care, and I walk in, and the woman says, oh, I've got a note in your file. You're a VIP. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I swear to you, I'm not a VIP. But she said, oh, no, there's a note. Your salesperson said you're going to get a free pair of glasses. And I said, you cannot treat me any differently than any other employee. And part of it is if you work in HR and you're managing the contracts, that's one thing. But I just met with the woman who said, I'll put a note in your file. I told her not to do it. And now I'm dealing with these really lovely people at the front. And they say, it's not a big deal. We'll get you another pair of glasses. And I said, well, yeah, I have to understand the actual vendor or the product that we have doesn't allow for that. And so I have to wait another year. I just want to see if you can fix the scratch. And then I know I'm in the middle of hell. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to now disclose all this. I've got to now tell my boss, our compliance officer, and I have to identify who the people are that have said this. And before you know it, I am in the middle of something. That's how easy it is for us to have a conflict at the RF. So just keep in mind, I just had to disclose it. I had to write it up. I had to put down who the people were that talked to me. I told them I didn't need anything extra. And the outside didn't understand it. They just didn't, they couldn't understand my perspective on why I'm not allowed to receive anything better than what you would get as an employee. So an ounce of prevention and supervision is worth, oh my goodness, so much. So coaching for me, and when we talk about performance, is about what we do and how we do it. Excuse me, I just answer. So, while I'm on camera, blowing my nose. So when you hear people say, oh, geez, he's a great employee. I mean, he can get all that contract work done, but he's mean to people. That he's not a good employee, because a good employee, a great employee, the people that we aspire to be, are great at what they do and how they do it. And most people lose their jobs at the RF on how they do it, not what they do. People come to us with some skill set or you teach them, but it's the how that's a problem. So having these knee-to-knee meetings with people consistently can really help prevent problems. So it sounds like many of you have one-on-one or team meetings. Do you do them like religiously every month, right? So the individual one-on-one meetings is not the same thing as having a team meeting. And having an open door policy, which we all like to think we have, is a kind of dated reference to being available. In reality, you're so busy, and my experience with people here on your campus and other campuses is that you're so busy churning out the transactions because we're in such a compliant environment that you may lose sight of the fact that it's not good for you to have a line outside your cubicle or a line outside your door all day long. That's bad business behavior. Good business behavior says, you know what, Jenna, we're going to meet on Tuesday. Why don't you save that for then? If it's not critical, save it for when we're meeting need and me. And so a good practice is to have those times because you're also talking about professional development. If I know that the one-on-one meeting I'm having also includes a little bit of, hey, you said you wanted to go to a conference, that's what you put in your development plan, how are your plans for that? Or you said you were going to go back and get your MPH, how's that going? So one-on-one time lets us give, I think, the space that's needed for our professional development as well. So think about that. I always talk about using a strength-based approach, so what you're doing well is helpful. Just don't do the but, right? So it's not, hey, Chris, you know what? You did a great job setting up that training, but the food came in late or, you know, people were thirsty. Instead, you know, a strength-based approach is much more around, I was really impressed by the way you set up the room. People seemed to be prepared. The notes were ready. I also noticed that the food came in late. What can we do differently next time? It's different, right, than saying, but you stink at this end. So just try to use that approach, and you can steal my 3-day rule. My 3-day rule is once I have a conversation with Chris, which of course I never would, but if I had to, and we're meeting on a Tuesday, and we were having a little bit of issue with setting up for this training, and the people coming didn't come in right, I'm going to give her feedback on Tuesday, and 3 business days later, on Friday, I'm circling back to her. Hey Chris, we talked on Tuesday. How are things going today? Because what did she do on Tuesday? She drove home. She hates me. Hates me. I hate her. I'll never work for her again. Right? And because she's really, in some ways, people get blindsided to the feedback. They're not expecting it. So a really compassionate thing to do is to go back to people 3 days later, and then I get her version of the story. And what was her version of the story, maybe? Oh, I just had to I was just coming back from taking my mother to a doctor's appointment. I got yelled at outside just before you all walked in. There's another version of the story that she didn't get a chance to tell me because I'm giving her feedback that's critical, and because I need to give it to her. So 3 days later, steal the rule. But it's an easy way to get back in touch with people, and it preserves the relationships we have with one another. So when we're having issues at work and people are worried about how things are going, if you circle back in 3 business days, you have a chance to build a relationship. At the RF, we have informal resolutions and we have formal, but the informal is really dealing with the problem where it began. Oh heck, that's a great idea. That's a new concept, right? But instead, our natural tendency when somebody has a problem is to go up the org chart and back down again, only to have everybody along the way say, did you handle it directly where it occurred? So my suggestion, and what we really try to teach managers at the RF, is if an employee is having a problem, to really facilitate the resolution with the other employee. So it might be Chris and I are the supervisors, and our 2 staff have had trouble, and they're just like butting heads. We may say, you know what, I got an idea. Why don't we facilitate a conversation with both those employees? You and I in the room with them. We'll start off with what's working well, where are we getting stuck, what are we going to do differently. You can facilitate the resolution together with supervisors, and I haven't had to go to the provost's office to get you involved in this situation. I have dealt with it where it occurs. And then, of course, in my best handwritten email, I will say, thanks for meeting with us on Tuesday. These are the things that we talked about. This is what we decided we would do differently. Let's check in again in 90 days. If we all did that when an issue occurred, imagine how quicker we get back to work. People's egos, their self-confidence, and people want to say things like, I just want to give you something off the record. There's no off the record. Have you figured that one out? There's no off the record. If you're coming to human resources, if you're coming to your supervisor, it's an issue. Otherwise, you'd be talking to your partner at home about it, and you wouldn't bring it into work. If you're having trouble at work, we don't have off the record conversations. We want people to take accountability for what they're doing. And sometimes when you come to me and you're my colleague and you say, you know what, I want to talk with you about something, you might have to say, listen, I'm glad to help you, but I'm going to check back in with you next week to see if you actually talked to so-and-so. Because most of us are just scared of the conflict. And yet, if we just write the 3 things down we want to say to the person, and we get a little support from our supervisor, and there's some accountability built in, because your supervisor says, yeah, I think you can take care of that, Chris, on your own, but I'm going to talk to you about it next Tuesday. You know what that does? That says, don't come to me with issues if you're not ready to deal with them. And then the best thing we can do is say, you tickle it, right? And you just say, oh, don't forget to check in with Chris to see if that actually got discussed. So we're all kind of working together on resolving conflict, and it works. It's magical, because once we do that, people then, you start saying, you know what, check back in with me and tell me how that conversation went. They realize you mean business. You're not here to be EAP, but we do have an EAP program. So we do have places that people can go with issues, but it's not for you. You know, supervisors you're managing the work. You're trying to get the best out of people and be the most supportive you can. The most supportive thing you can do is help them deal with the conflict. Because we get good at it, right? Who was terrible the first time they had to address an issue? I mean, I know I was working in a halfway house, and Terry, the maintenance guy, was bending down to fix a dishwasher, and I'm having a board meeting in the dining room. It was a group home. And everybody could see his rear end. I mean, all of his rear end. And I'm young, I'm like 25 years old, I've got a board meeting, and they're all looking in the kitchen. I'm like, I have to get up and say something, don't I? And so I did, and that was the first time I had to give feedback to somebody. But it gets so much easier after you do it a while, especially when people know that you care about them and you're doing it in the spirit of their development. Informally, don't give feedback to people when you're angry, right? That's like a little, tip. If you're angry, that's the worst time to get feedback, because that all comes through. Then nothing looks subjective, and the accountability piece just looks like you're mad. So you have to wait until things are a little cooler for you. So that's how we do it informally. And we really hope that people use that, but we do have a formal grievance practice. Is anybody here how to use this? Okay, well, I hope you never do. And Donna, we don't have too many of these issues anyway, mostly.
Very true and very lucky.
Yeah.
When they do come up, they are not fun.
Right.
So if you handle them right, which you will teach us,
Yeah.
It makes the whole thing go smoothly.
It does. And of course, you always include the person, right? So one of the things that, I don't know how this happens in not just our industry, but around business, is that we think the person who has put forward the issue, it's all going to be dealt with over here, but the employee who brought it forward is not involved. Wrong. The employee who brought it forward is very involved, because we have to hear what they're going to say, we want to manage it, and we want to get back to them on what the situation is and how it resolved. So we have a formal requirement that basically says you're going to file, Chris is going to file a written complaint, and she's going to do it in concert with her supervisor. And then the management above the supervisor will look at the issue, interview people, make a decision within 10 business days. You have to file a complaint in the name of an employee. It can't just be this general, well, I'm just getting a sense I don't like, things aren't going well around here. It has to be something, an infraction, right? Something somebody did or said that puts the organization on notice that there's a problem. We have an appeals process. The OM has to be involved. That's the operations manager. Do you know who your operations manager is on campus? Mike Levine? Do you know who the deputy is? Donna Scudo? Well, I'm on camera, right? I'm going to say a lot of the work gets done with the deputy on most campuses. And then the employee receives written determination. So this step, these processes can take 2 months. All because why? The employee didn't like what was said in the lunchroom. Maybe it was a negative statement, one of bias in nature, doesn't get dealt with. Then the person is waiting for the supervisor who they've told, and the supervisor hasn't done anything with it. Oh, that's just Kathleen. You know her, right? And then we're not just like putting it under the rug. We're just forgetting it happened. And then before you know it, we got a problem, and we knew it. And so if you've ever been involved in a disciplinary issue or an interrogation or something from the EEOC, we all get interviewed. When did you know it? When did you hear it? And then, unfortunately, that just paints a terrible light on how we're managing conflict, when really we can handle it. You know, there probably isn't one thing in your work life that you haven't heard somebody else had to deal with. So when I say we have a formal process, we do, but we'd really prefer to be handled on the ground floor. We do have supervisory and coaching for performance objectives here. So a strong performance management, that's what I'm talking about, dealing with issues as they're arising, are critical to our success. Effective programs, they drive efficiency. So after I meet with Chris, because I've had a hard discussion with her on Tuesday, now we're meeting again on Friday, we're back to working in a better cycle the following week. We're spiraling upward in our performance, in what we do and how we do it. When we don't address issues, or we make too much out of every issue, then the relationship starts failing. So we want to make sure we're encouraging desired attitudes, behaviors, and results from employees, and being, I think you all, many of you gave examples of, you give specific praise around a job well done. You know, something that really can make people feel good about their work. Organizations struggle with the challenge of maintaining an ongoing commitment in a fair and consistent process. Donna talked about that. She said, it's really better for us to be consistent with employees around issues around leave, performance management, issues, time and attendance. Being fair is the right thing to do, and being consistent. But it may look a little different employee by employee. And we don't always know what the issue is for people, but one of the ways to make sure we know is when we're having let's say we're having a time and attendance issue. And this happened to me, right? So I have an employee who worked in the central office for 28 years, and that woman couldn't get herself into work by 9:20, any day that I saw her. And, you know, I'm sitting, I can see people coming in and out. I'm like, oh, please don't make me keep a record of this. But I'm going to have to, because employees are complaining to me. What are they saying? Hey, how come so-and-so gets to come in at 9:20 every day? No one seems to be addressing it. And so I ended up talking to the employee and saying, look, we're going to have to get you on a different work schedule, because I just don't think you can get in by 9:20. And to tell you the truth, it doesn't matter to me, as long as you're here, you know, to the end of the day helping. So we worked out an agreement where she has swing hours, so she can come in at 8:30 and leave at 4:30, or come in at 9:30 and leave at 5:30. And I said, oh, and guess what? You're going to tell everybody that's your new schedule. Because I am tired of hearing people tell me that I'm not dealing with your issue, when I am, but it's too personal. I don't need to tell people why she can't get into work, and she had a reason. And so that's what she did. And so, of course, the staff meeting comes. She doesn't have it on her agenda. I'm like, hello, remember you're going to talk about your schedule change? And she did, and people understand it, and I haven't heard a word in 2 years. Yes?
So what happens when others say, well, I want the same thing, I want to come in at 7:30, leave at 3:30, or 10 to 6?
Do you have a policy on that, or a practice on it?
This is just a what if, but on the state side I'm having an issue.
Okay.
So, but just like in terms of this, what
That's right.
happens if...
Well, and you have to follow whatever your department is doing, so I wouldn't advise anything different than what you're doing. But I would say that ultimately, if we're doing right by every single employee that we manage, it is going to look different. Because their need might be, I have to come in at 8 because I've got to leave by 4:15. And my issue might be, I'd really like to take Tuesdays at, you know, whatever, 3 o'clock off. I'll come in earlier the rest of the week because I want to take a class. So if we're really doing right by employees, we're having unique and deliberate conversations about what their needs are. And the only time people point, when do people point about what they don't like? When they're not getting something. I mean, look at it, if everything's good, and you've worked in this environment, I have too, where everybody's got kind of a good schedule, they've got the flexibility they need, but they're really moving through and doing great things. No one's complaining. It's when you feel like you're getting less than somebody else. So then you got to have that conversation. What is it you're looking for? Because if you're looking at Chris, I know it's because you feel like you're not getting something, and then that's just a conversation. It's a good point, and it's so hard, right? Because in 2017, it's like, why are we still talking about this? Like, shouldn't it be about the work?
Right.
but boy, it gets you, and it gets what people really want to talk about. So the role of us as managers, we're educating, we're encouraging, we're supporting, we're leading by example, we're counseling, we're disciplining. We are not afraid of the big, difficult conversations. In fact, like I said, after I had to tell Terry to pull his pants up, and, you know, he's looking at me, I'm like 20 years younger than him, and he's probably thinking, what in the world is this woman doing running a program? And that was one of the hardest ones I had to do, but ever since then, it gets much easier to get feedback. And I'm not saying that you should get joy out of it, but you should be able to work through it quickly. And if you circle back with somebody 3 days later, it's showing that, you know, you may have, you know, struck a chord with somebody. So disciplining is part of what we do. I think effective coaching would be providing examples for employees, right, with defined expectations of the goal of the job. I mean, respectful, inspiring, trust. You said inspiring, and I think that that's what that is, right? You're just saying, I think you're doing a great job organizing this, that, and the other thing. What I want you to continue working on are your relationships outside of our department. What I've noticed is you don't seem to be interacting when there's a break. It seems as though maybe you aren't as comfortable speaking publicly. Be specific, describe the behaviors. When you get in that conversation where they say, oh, it's your attitude, that's a trap. Do not go down there. Attitude is demonstrated by behavior. So stick with the behaviors, not she just got a terrible attitude. That doesn't hold up anywhere. You have to demonstrate what the behavior is. And people can fix a behavior. And maybe they don't like to hear it, but they'll try. And then as time goes on, you'll see that people get better at it. And so being respectful means you circle back with them 3 days later. And you said, hey, I'm checking in on you. I want to see how you're doing today after our conversation. That's one example. And people need to trust you. So, this is hard. So I think inspiring trust means you're not talking badly about other employees. So if we can keep it together somehow, even it's tempting as it is, to just talk about the work together but not be in the mode of, well, I'm going to tell you what I said to her. That's again, human nature for us to do that, but really, who do we trust? I trust the people that aren't talking badly about other people. I trust the people who I think, well, maybe they're saying the same thing about me outside of a room. So that's really hard to do, and you have to work on it. We do have progressive discipline. It's progressive in nature because we don't. I don't know if HR gets any of these calls. Every once in a while, I'll get a call. I just want you to know I'm letting so and so go today, and you're like, oh, what happened? Well, they were rude to the chancellor at a meeting, something like that. And what we want to make sure we're doing is using the steps of progressive discipline, because nobody comes to work trying to get fired. I mean, I don't think. I just haven't met anybody yet in my career. So we come to work with the spirit, right, of contributing, making a paycheck, and then doing something good for the greater good. What we don't want to have is no warning. Hey, you got a problem here. So again, if we're dealing with problems where they're at, great. But if we're not managing it and it keeps getting worse, then the key to this is making sure that the employee's aware of what the specific behavior was. Not, hey, I didn't like your attitude. Trap. It's a trap. Don't go down the trap. Give them an opportunity to improve. I have worked with a woman who a few years back was on a performance improvement plan. That's the PIP, the dreaded PIP. And got off of it and was promoted within 4 years. So she worked hard at it, and so did I. And so people can turn this around, right? So you don't put somebody on a corrective action unless you think they're gonna be successful. They have to believe that you believe in them. And so it's got to be fair, consistent, progressive. And it gives employees due process, so employees deserve an opportunity to say, now wait a minute, I want you to hear what I have to say about that. We've had many of those situations on this campus and other campuses where you have an employee alleging something about a supervisor. Oh, and guess what? It's never RF to RF. it's always RF to SUNY. So SUNY has a whole different set of disciplinary options, right? And starting with a word, it's interrogation. So if you're on the SUNY side, you're interrogated. That feels good. If you're on the RF side, you're interviewed. But we have to mesh all this together. We work together with the departments, the employee relations departments, the general counsels, the affirmative action officers. So we work together to make sure that we're giving the employee due process. So for us on the RF side, we start with verbal counselings, and then we move into written, and then a performance improvement plan, and then finally a termination. And I am involved in most all of those throughout our system, and we probably only have, a handful of terminations a year. We have, about 17,000 RF employees. So good work is going on. Managers are keeping things at bay, but we do have, a handful of separations. But on any given day, we have 85 employee relations issues. So that's a lot. We have a system for tracking that and trying to be consistent and fair so that employees, at Buff State are receiving the same sort of process that Upstate Medical Center is using with their employees. So in your packet, I've been very specific on what these are and how to do it, but so if you want more information, we'd be glad to help you. But it's kind of a negative dive into you better do this. So I'll leave it for you if you want to look through your packets, and then of course you would contact your HR folks here if you got to this point. So I want to talk a little bit about building talent and how important this is at the Research Foundation. Make sure I'm done. Yep. We have mentoring and protege programs. Did you know that? Okay, so maybe somebody in the room here could raise their hand if they've been part of it. Yeah. Okay. So Peter and Stephanie, Peter was in our Leadership Academy.
And the mentoring.
And the mentoring program the following year. So if you work for the Research Foundation, you have these opportunities to be involved in these two programs. The reason I said I was in Buffalo yesterday was at the Leadership Academy, which they're graduating in December. The second class is, we took a tour of UB. And there are 4 people from UB that are in the Leadership Academy, so we decided to do it there. And then we had the previous class join us, which is why Peter was yesterday with us as well. So we take about 25 people. The new group will start July 1, 2018. The Leadership Academy is for people who are looking to expand in their job and be ready for the next position that may come their way. And we have a public speaking program. We have campus tours. We have a project. You do Now Discover Your Strengths, which is a strength-based program by a book that we do by Marcus Buckingham. We do a piece on Jim Collins. I think we're going to do a piece on Jenna's favorite woman, Brene Brown. We have a variety of programs. So one of the things I'm going to tell you about the Leadership Academy that's really fun is that there's a mentoring piece that goes on top of it. So if you're in the Leadership Academy, you will get a mentor assigned to you, Mary Kraft at UB. Her mentor was Rosie Taravella, who is the CEO of the American Red Cross in, I would say, she's in upstate New York. Went to college with her, asked her if she'd be in the program, she said yes. I think the highest level mentor we asked for was Michelle Obama, and I did get a note from her. She said she wasn't able to at this time, but one of the women in the program said, I'd love to be mentored by Michelle Obama. So you ask us who you want your mentor to be, we'll do it. So that's one program. Then we have a mentoring protege program, and Stephanie and I were in that together last year. And that program that Peter's been in too, again, for any new folks that work at the not new, but people who work at the Research Foundation that are looking to have a mentor maybe outside of their line of supervision, but someplace else. So we match people up by campus. We have 44 people in the program right now, and we've got a great match-up system. Oh, and you may say, hey, I work for SUNY, can I be in the program? Everyone's a winner. Yes, you can be in the program. So just let us know. And if you're doing work on behalf of the Research Foundation, which is why you're all here, then we would consider that. So it goes through the OM and deputy OM. So Donna gets to look at all the people that have applied, and then we move forward, and we have a really great timeline. And I'm telling you this because building talent at the RF is important to us, and we know you don't have time for it, but a bona fide program will help you, because we put the effort in a couple of years ago, and now we're just running the programs. Donna was actually, you helped with the, I think, inaugural program that we had for the mentoring, and it's been great. So good news on that, almost 200 people have been through these programs. Jenna, I always ask you this, what's the percentage of success?
I think 68% of people have reported that they are contributing in new and bigger ways, and of that 68%, 13% have said that they were promoted into their first ever supervisory role after participating in one of these programs. So, so that means we're getting more value out of the folks that they may step away for a few hours here and there to take a virtual session, but we're getting much more value out of them later, and they are also seeing the value themselves.
Yeah, so I wanted to tell you about that. Open chairs, this is a concept you can steal from me. This is a development opportunity, so where 2 or more of us are gathered, there's an open chair for somebody else. So as you're having staff meetings, have an open chair, physically like this one, and invite somebody else to sit in it, so they can hear what you're working on. And then the only price of admission to being an open chair is that you then have to tell people what you're working on. It's an amazing, organic process that I developed years ago, and it works. And so an open chair doesn't have many rules around it. It's just that in your department planning session, you have an open chair for somebody else to come in. So does anybody here have a department meeting? Raise your hand if you have a department meeting. Like a department staff meeting every once in a while. All right, would you let somebody sit in your staff meeting so they could hear what you're talking about and learn more? Yeah? Okay, so maybe, Stephanie, we could take a list of who says yes, and people could just open chair some other people's staff meetings. It's the easiest, cheapest way to learn what's going on, not in your department. Oh, but guess what happens? You're sitting in somebody else's staff meeting, it completely impacts you, only you didn't know it until you were sitting in their staff meeting. So it's a really great organic way to learn. You can borrow it. Public speaking. So best practice says 3 times a year you should be doing what I'm doing right now. So are you doing it? Raise your hand if you're speaking publicly 3 times a year. Good. That's excellent. So we got 6 times a year. So that can be in your living room, right? You're talking to people about, your great program. It can be here. The program that we run has 4 modules for public speaking, so we force people to speak publicly on different subjects, and it culminates at the end with an interview. I want to remind you about recapture strategies. So this is, people leave and we regret it. We should be keeping their names and numbers, because checking back in on people 30, 60, 90 days after they leave, sometimes you get them at the point where they're like, the grass wasn't greener, and yeah, I would consider coming back. Sometimes we do that just before we offer a position to somebody. So you post a position because the person has left, but it's a regretted loss. It's somebody where you're like, oh my gosh, the institution really needs this person to stay. Let me check in on them. So we have been very successful doing this. Just remember to keep their names and numbers. Retention meetings. Some people call these something else now. I can't remember what the latest. Yeah, like a stay interview. But this is basically when someone's getting ready to leave and you know it, and you want to hang on to their arm and their leg and say, let's go to lunch, see what I can do to retain you. Retention meetings are not guaranteeing employment, but they're helping the person who's just getting ready to leave have a conversation about staying. And so their stay interviews are another way that corporations are calling it. Talked to you about the 3-day rule. Anybody heard of Robert Greenleaf? Yeah? Okay, so I have been teaching on Robert Greenleaf for 15 years. And Robert Greenleaf was an MIT professor who coined the phrase servant as leader in 1971. And it really fits into higher education. I mean, I don't know if you feel that way, but
I use it in my classroom.
do you?
They have to read it.
Good.
Yes, and they have to present on it. So
Good.
yes.
Okay, so then you want to tell us a little bit about what you think servant leadership is?
For me, I say that true leadership is about serving, because again, if you're not serving others, what are you doing? So the idea is when we're in higher education, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be stacking it back into favor of our scholars and helping them be their brilliant selves. i.e. we're serving them.
Yeah.
And we're thinking about them before we're thinking about ourselves.
Nice. Yeah, so the highest level needs of individuals are put in front of you, not your own. It's not an ego way of delivering information, and you're distributing the power to the worker. You're saying design teams, employees should be involved in everything. And when we just are doing our retirement planning, right now at central office, 11 employees are leaving, and they're retiring through an incentive program. I kicked off futuring teams and said, all right, we're gonna have futuring teams. And the first question I get, well, we're not gonna put the employee in them, right? I'm like, yeah, we need the retiree to tell us what they've been working on for the last 30 years. So servant leadership is a philosophy, and it's, you know servant leaders when you meet them, because they are wired in a way that says, I am committed to the growth of others, and I do that laterally. I don't do it vertically. So just because you work in my department doesn't mean I'm any more or less interested in the people that are working in finance and compliance. A lateral leader says that you're committed to the growth of others regardless of where they work, because that's who you are and what you want. So if anybody loves servant leadership and wants a training on it, I'd be glad to come back. Or I'm just going to end it.
So the application for the Leadership Academy, what's the process like? Do you have to be nominated, letters of recommendation? Are you still accepting applications for the July 1, 2018?
We haven't kicked that off yet, but we'll do that in about March, and I'll do it through Donna.
Okay.
So people will nominate themselves, or you'll get a nomination from somebody else. You gotta get a reference. It's like a supervisory, hey, you know what, she would be great for this. And then we have a process whereby the current Leadership Academy members become the selection committee, and then they determine who's gonna be the next group. But again, everyone's a winner, so if you're not in it, it's only because somebody said, you know, this isn't the right time for the person. Yeah, but we were able to take most everybody.
It'll come back on in a minute. For some reason, the projector turned off.
Ah,
clicked ahead.
okay. I think I know what my next slide is actually, so I'm gonna
You
just.
got the screen up there.
Yeah. Okay, so the other person, somebody mentioned, who said this about getting the right people on the bus?
I did.
You did, okay. So that's a Jim Collins reference where, everybody know who Jim Collins is? He's pretty famous, and he's the one who really coined a lot of these phrases that companies use around getting the right people on the bus, getting the right people driving the bus, getting the wrong people off the bus. It's basically a metaphor for saying, you can do anything if you've got the right people with you. But just make sure the wrong people aren't sitting on the bus with you. So managing through performance issues. And so it's a Jim Collins phrase. And in there, I talk about the 5 levels of leadership. I just identify the top 3 that are the most common. But Jim Collins, you know, has done his work calling it from good to great. So how to make a good employee a great one, how to make a good university a great university. And our previous chancellor, Nancy Zimfer, would always talk about Jim Collins as, he had a reference to the big, hairy, audacious goals, and what are the goals for the institution. And a lot of people use these to try to transform the work that they're doing. I bring it up because the thing that I love about Jim Collins is that he talks about level 5 leaders, and that's a level that we aspire to be, that most of us are just climbing the ladder trying to get there. But it's this paradoxical blend of professional will, so that fire in your belly to just do a great job, and personal humility. So it's this combination of what you do and how you do it. And the professional will is easy to understand because that's sort of what I think gets us all excited, thank you, about the work that we do. He says level 5 leaders build enduring greatness through this blend of humility and professional will. And the personal humility, right, is the person who starts the meeting with, I'm going to take responsibility for what happened today. I think you would mention that you own something for your staff. That's humility. That's saying, you know, as much as I had nothing to do with this, I'm going to own it. The first week that I was the VP of HR for the corporate system, a RF benefits bulletin went out. Donna, you probably remember this. It was wrong. My name's at the bottom of it. I'm new. I don't even know what our benefits are. You know, I'm so new. And the benefit bulletin goes out and it doesn't have the fourth quarter calculation for retirement, so it's individualized. Now we have it in self-service, but it's wrong. So I have to stand up a bunch of people at Stony Brook who are angry about another issue and tell them that it's wrong and that I apologize, my name is on it, please contact us, we're gonna fix it. But when I get back to the office, I don't just say, oh, it was wrong, it's okay. I sit with the folks who were doing benefits at the time, and none of them are actually here anymore, and I say, who made the mistake? And no one's gonna own it. We did, well, the person looked at this, it went to this review. I'm like, no, who made the mistake? And I said, this is important because the person who made the mistake needs to know the significance of it and fix it, learn from it, and then go on. I'm not gonna put it in their evaluation, but Jim Collins says you have to be accountable too. So we as leaders sometimes have to own that conversation and say, listen, that was a mistake that I made, or if I could have done differently, boy, I would have done this. It opens up the conversation for everybody else to join in. So you have to model it, and that's what humility to Jim Collins is, as one example. Lastly, he says true leadership only exists if people follow you when they have the freedom not to. So lots of times we'll have people say, oh, you're a good supervisor, I really like working with you. But would they jump and go work with you someplace else? Would they keep in touch with you when they leave? True leadership, according to Collins, is people follow you when they don't have to. And that is a true compliment, right, to anything that we do.
Because otherwise you're just taking a walk.
Just taking a walk, yeah, love it. Any thoughts on this, servant leadership, Jim Collins? If anybody down there wants to learn more, I'd be glad to come back. Maybe we could co-do something together.
Love that.
Yeah, that would be good.